I asked when the wedding is, and my daughter-in-law smiled. We got married yesterday. When I asked my son Max when his wedding would be, his fiancée Lena looked me right in the eye, a small, tight smile on her lips. "Oh, we already got married yesterday," she said, her voice as light as air. "We only invited special people." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. The air in my own living room suddenly felt thin and cold. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece, a loud, steady rhythm marking the seconds of my new reality. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Special people. The phrase echoed in the sudden silence. I had paid their rent for 3 years. I bought every single piece of furniture they owned, from the bed they slept in to the coffee table where Lena's purse now sat. I filled their refrigerator when Max called to say things were tight, never once asking when they would pay me back. I was the one they called for emergencies, the one they relied on for everything. And yet, I wasn't special. My hand, the one holding the phone I had just been about to use to call my sister with happy news, started to tremble. I looked at my son. Max wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at a spot on the carpet, his shoulders hunched, a stranger in his own mother's house. He sat there silent, while his new wife lounged comfortably on my sofa, the very one I had picked out and paid for just last year. In that single, shattering instant, something inside of me broke. It was the soft, trusting part of a mother's heart. But as the pieces fell away, I felt something else begin to form in its place. Something harder, clearer, and much, much stronger. My life, as I knew it, was over, and a new one was about to begin. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. My name is Lucia Monroe. I am 68 years old, and for all of those years I have lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My home is a small brick bungalow on a street lined with maple trees that turn a brilliant gold in the fall. It's the house I moved into with my husband Robert 45 years ago. It's where we raised our son, Max. And for the last 10 years since Robert's passing, it's been the place where my world slowly and quietly shrank down to the size of one person, my son. Robert was a brewery worker, a man with strong hands and a quiet laugh. He believed in simple things, a hard day's work, a paid-off mortgage, and saving for a rainy day. Our life was built on that foundation, steady, predictable, and secure. When his heart gave out one Tuesday morning while he was reading the newspaper, that entire foundation crumbled beneath me. The silence he left behind was a physical presence in the house. I would walk into a room and expect to see him in his armchair. I would start to tell him something about my day before remembering he wasn't there to hear it. The grief was a fog I thought I would never find my way out of. Max, then just 22 and finishing college, became my anchor. He moved back home for a few months, and his presence filled the empty spaces. He was the reason I got out of bed in the morning. All the love, all the care, all the focus I had poured into my marriage, I now directed toward him. I made a silent vow to Robert's memory that I would always make sure Max was taken care of. It was a promise born of love and loss, a promise that would eventually cost me nearly everything I had left. The financial support started about a year after Max moved into his own apartment. He'd found a job in marketing, but he said the pay was barely enough to cover his student loans and bills. He called me one evening, his voice strained. "Mom, I'm so embarrassed to ask," he began. And I knew what was coming. "I'm a little short on rent this month. Just a couple hundred. I'll pay you back as soon as I get my next check." My heart ached for him. I remembered Robert and I scraping by in our early years. "Of course, sweetheart," I said without hesitation. "Don't you worry about it." I went to the bank the next day and withdrew the money from our savings account. Our savings, Robert's and mine. It felt wrong, somehow, to use it without him. But the thought of Max being in trouble was worse. He never did pay me back and I never asked. The next month, he was short again. This time, he needed the full $500. "The company is going through some restructuring," he explained vaguely. "Things are tight for everyone." And so it began. The first of every month became a ritual. I would go to the bank, transfer the money, and feel a small, complicated mix of resentment and relief. The resentment was a quiet, shameful secret. The relief was louder, the relief of knowing my son was safe, that he had a roof over his head because of me. I was his mother. This was my job. To justify the withdrawals, I began to cut back on my own life. The weekly lunch with my friends from the church became a monthly one, and then it stopped altogether. I told them I was busy, but the truth was I couldn't spare the $15. I started shopping at the discount grocery store, buying canned vegetables and day-old bread. My world became a series of small, invisible sacrifices. Then, 2 years into this arrangement, Max met Lena. He brought her home for Sunday dinner, and I was so eager to welcome her. She was vibrant and talkative with a way of filling a room with her energy. She complimented my home, my cooking, my garden. "You have such wonderful taste, Lucia," she'd said, admiring a landscape painting Robert had bought me for our anniversary. "Max is so lucky to have you," I beamed, soaking in the praise. I saw in her the daughter I'd never had, a new person to love and care for. I started calling her sweetheart right away, a term of endearment I thought she had earned simply by loving my son. Once Lena moved in with Max, the requests for money doubled. It was no longer just the rent. It was a constant stream of small crises. One week it was a call from Lena, her voice a little breathless. "Lucia, I am so sorry to bother you, but the car made a terrible noise on the way to work, and the mechanic says it's the transmission. It's $900. We just don't have it." I didn't even question it. I transferred the money. A month later, it was a call from Max. "Mom, Lena has a terrible toothache and her insurance won't cover the root canal. It's an emergency." I paid for it. There was always a reason, always a sense of urgency that left no room for questions. They became a team, with Lena often making the calls, her voice full of a sweet, apologetic tone that was impossible to refuse. "You're our angel, Lucia," she would say after I'd agreed to pay for a new set of tires or an overdue utility bill. I felt needed. I felt important. I was the quiet, invisible partner in their lives, the foundation upon which they were building their future. I was so busy feeling essential that I didn't notice I was becoming invisible. The day Lena asked me to go wedding dress shopping was the peak of my delusion. "My mom can't fly in," she explained, "and there's no one else I'd rather share this moment with." We went to a beautiful, expensive boutique downtown, the kind of place I had only ever looked at through the window. I felt a surge of pride as I watched her, this beautiful young woman who was going to be my daughter-in-law. She tried on several dresses, but then she walked out in a gown of intricate lace and silk that made the whole shop go quiet. She was breathtaking. She stood in front of the three-way mirror, a sad, wistful look on her face. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. She glanced at the price tag, and her shoulders slumped in a perfectly performed gesture of disappointment. "Oh, well, it's $3,000. I could never." Max, who had been quiet the whole time, looked at me with helpless, pleading eyes. He didn't have to say a word. I knew my role. I saw her sad face. I saw my son's distress, and my heart took over. Robert's voice was a faint whisper in my mind, warning me about saving for a rainy day, but I silenced it. This was not a rainy day. This was a celebration. This was family. "I'll get it," I said, my voice sounding shaky but determined. I stepped forward and pulled my credit card from my wallet. "Consider it my wedding gift to you both." Lena's sad face transformed instantly into one of radiant joy. She threw her arms around me, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. "Lucia, thank you. Thank you. You are the most generous, wonderful mother-in-law in the world." On the drive home, I replayed those words over and over in my head. The most wonderful mother-in-law in the world. I had bought that title. I had paid $3,000 for it. I thought it was the price of admission into the happy family I had always dreamed of. I had no idea it was actually the price of my own exclusion. The pink dress I'd bought for the wedding hung in a protective plastic sleeve in the back of my closet. It was a soft rose-colored silk, elegant and understated. I'd spent an entire afternoon searching for it, going from store to store, something I hadn't done for myself in years. When the saleswoman had zipped it up, I saw a woman in the mirror I barely recognized. Not a lonely widow, but the proud mother of the groom. The dress was an investment in a future moment of happiness. I'd also bought a new pair of cream-colored heels and a small matching clutch. The entire ensemble sat waiting, a perfect picture of a day I was dreaming of. My anticipation was a quiet hum beneath the surface of my days. I kept my phone close, expecting the call from Max with the date. Every time it rang, my heart would give a little leap. A few times I almost called him to ask, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to seem pushy. This was their moment, and I wanted to respect their timing. I imagined the ceremony, the vows, the look on Max's face. I pictured myself sitting in the front row, dabbing my eyes with a tissue, a part of their new beginning. My sister Clara was the only person I spoke to about it in detail. "I found the most beautiful dress, Clara," I'd gushed over the phone just a week before my world fell apart. "And I have a gift for them, a check for $1,000, to help with the honeymoon or a down payment on a house someday." I was so full of plans, so full of joy. "You've been a good mother, Lucia," Clara said, her voice warm. "You deserve to see your son happy. You deserve to be celebrated." Her words echoed in my head, a sweet and bitter memory now. The Saturday it happened started like any other. I woke up, the late morning sun streaming through my kitchen window. I made a pot of tea and a piece of toast and sat down at my small kitchen table. I decided to use the old laptop Robert had bought me years ago to look up a recipe for a pot roast. I rarely used it for anything else, but I was feeling ambitious. After finding the recipe, I idly clicked over to the social media site my niece had set up for me. I usually just looked at her family pictures. But that day, the website's algorithm showed me a suggested post. It was a picture from a woman named Sarah, one of Lena's cousins. I'd met her briefly at a summer barbecue. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was a group of people on a sunny patio, their faces bright with laughter, holding glasses of champagne. Then my eyes focused on the two people in the center. It was Max and Lena. He was wearing a dark suit I'd never seen before, and she was in the wedding dress, the lace gown, the one I had paid for. A white veil was pinned in her hair. My breath caught in my throat. My hand froze on the mouse. The caption beneath the picture read, "Such a beautiful surprise wedding. Congratulations to the new Mr. and Mrs. Monroe. Surprise wedding." The words didn't make sense. I clicked on Sarah's name, my heart starting to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. Her profile was public, and it was a gallery of the wedding I was supposed to be planning for, waiting for, dreaming of. The wedding that had already happened. Yesterday, I scrolled, each new photo a fresh stab of pain. There was a picture of Lena walking down an aisle of green grass, her father on her arm. Her mother was in the front row, weeping with joy. There was a picture of Max putting a ring on Lena's finger. His back was mostly to the camera, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. There was a picture of their first kiss as husband and wife, with guests cheering in the background. My eyes scanned the faces in the crowd, desperately, foolishly searching for myself. I wasn't there. I zoomed in on a wide shot of the reception. I saw Lena's parents at the head table, her siblings beside them. Friends I'd never met were laughing, dancing, and eating. Every important person in Lena's life was there, but the groom's side of the family was completely empty, except for a distant cousin of Max's I hadn't seen in years. There was no seat for the mother of the groom, no place for the woman who had funded the dress, the food, the very life they were celebrating. The most painful picture was one of Lena dancing with her father. She was looking up at him with such love and adoration, her head resting on his shoulder. It was the moment I had dreamed of sharing with my own son. The mother-son dance. A tradition, a memory, a moment I had been robbed of. They had erased me. They had taken my money and then made me disappear. The humiliation was a physical thing. It felt like a hot flush spreading from my chest up to my face. I felt like a fool. The phone calls I had made, the dress hanging in my closet, the check sitting on my mantelpiece. It was all a pathetic monument to my own stupidity. They hadn't forgotten. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate, calculated act of exclusion. They had planned this. They had discussed it. They had looked at the guest list and made a conscious decision that I was not welcome. I slowly, mechanically, closed the laptop. The friendly blue and white screen vanished, leaving only my own reflection in the dark glass. I saw the face of a 68-year-old woman with tired eyes and lines of worry etched around her mouth. A woman who had been used. I stood up and walked to my closet. I pushed aside my winter coats and looked at the pink dress. It looked garish and silly now, a costume for a play I had not been cast in. I touched the silky fabric, and a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I took the dress off the hanger, walked to the hallway, and stuffed it into the back of the linen closet, burying it under a pile of old blankets. I never wanted to see it again. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, sitting in Robert's armchair, the television on but the sound turned off. The images flickered across the screen, but I saw only the wedding photos, burned into my memory. The smiling faces, the champagne glasses, the lace dress. I was the invisible guest at my own son's life. The week that followed the discovery was the longest week of my life. The silence in my house, once a familiar comfort, became oppressive and heavy. It felt like a judgment. Every tick of the clock on the mantelpiece seemed to be counting the minutes since my heart had broken. I moved through my days like an automaton. I made my bed. I washed the few dishes I used. I went to the grocery store and bought food I had no appetite to eat. I saw my neighbors and waved, a smile plastered on my face that felt like a cheap mask. Inside, I was a churning sea of confusion, hurt, and a slow, simmering anger. A part of me, the mother in me, the part that had been in charge for so long, kept making excuses for Max. Maybe Lena's family planned it as a surprise for everyone. Maybe Max felt pressured. Maybe he was going to call and explain. I would pick up my phone a dozen times a day, my thumb hovering over his name in my contacts. I even typed out text messages, my fingers fumbling on the small screen. Max, I saw the pictures. I don't understand. Was there a wedding? Please call me. I deleted every single one. Pleading felt pathetic. Demanding an explanation felt pointless. What explanation could possibly be good enough? The hopeful, foolish part of me died a little more each day the phone didn't ring. The silence wasn't an accident. It was an answer. It told me they were not sorry. It told me they felt no guilt. It told me they were simply moving on with their lives that I had paid for but was not invited to share. The anger began to burn away the hurt. I had been more than a mother to him. I had been his provider, his safety net, his constant, unconditional support. And in return, he had treated me like a dirty secret. On Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week after I'd shoved the pink dress into the back of the closet, the phone finally rang. Its shrill sound cut through the heavy silence of the living room, making me jump. I looked at the caller ID, and my stomach twisted into a tight knot. Lena. My first impulse was to throw the phone across the room. My second was to let it go to voicemail. But as it rang a third time, a new feeling took over. It was a cold, calm curiosity. After a week of hiding and hurting, I wanted to hear what they had to say for themselves. I wanted to hear the lie they had concocted. I took a deep breath, pressed the button, and held the phone to my ear. I said nothing. Lucia. Lena's voice was sharp, laced with an impatience that set my teeth on edge. There was no warmth, no hello, no how are you, just my name spoken like a summons. Lucia, are you there? I've been calling. I waited a beat before I answered, my own voice coming out quiet and steady, a tone I barely recognized. I'm here. Good, she said, and then she launched right in. The landlord just called us. He was very rude. He says the rent is late, and that if we don't pay by tomorrow, he's going to add a $200 late fee. She paused, as if waiting for me to gasp and apologize. When I said nothing, her voice grew even sharper. You forgot to make the transfer, Lucia. The first of the month was last week. You forgot. The 2 words struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it. After a week of ignoring me, after getting married behind my back, the very first words she spoke to me were an accusation. An accusation that I had failed in my duty. My duty to pay for the life of the people who had publicly and privately humiliated me. In that instant, the last remnants of my sadness evaporated, replaced by a crystalline, righteous anger. A reel of my sacrifices played in my mind, fast and brutal. I saw myself standing in the pharmacy, deciding between my heart medication and a carton of milk, because my account was low after I'd paid for their emergency car repair. I saw myself wearing Robert's old frayed sweater around the house because I kept the thermostat at 60 degrees to save on the heating bill, a bill I paid on time, unlike them. I thought of the countless lonely dinners of canned soup and crackers. The birthdays and anniversaries I'd let pass without a single treat for myself. All so they could have organic groceries, new clothes, and weekends away. All so Lena could wear a $3,000 dress to a wedding she didn't want me at. And now, she had the nerve to say I forgot. A strange calm washed over me. It was the calm of a decision made, of a line drawn so clearly in the sand it could never be crossed again. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the air fill my lungs. The frantic bird in my chest was finally still. Didn't I tell you? I asked, my voice soft, almost conversational. The question caught her off guard. There was a pause, and then she said, her tone dripping with annoyance. Tell me what? What are you talking about, Lucia? The landlord is waiting. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, savoring it. I looked at the photograph of Robert on the mantelpiece, and I could almost feel him standing beside me, nodding with approval. I had been a fool for a long time, but I was not a fool anymore. I only help special people. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was a dead, hollow silence, the sound of a mind hitting a brick wall. I could picture her perfectly, standing in her living room, her mouth slightly open, the confident entitlement wiped clean from her face. I had taken away her power with a single sentence. I had reminded her that the money she saw as her right was, in fact, my choice, and I was no longer choosing her. I didn't wait for her to recover, to stammer, to yell. Her reaction didn't matter. What mattered was that I had finally spoken my truth. With a steady hand, I pressed the end call button. The click was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my own freedom. That night, sleep was an impossibility. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, my wakefulness was not fueled by anxiety or grief. It was fueled by a strange new energy, a cold fire of purpose that had been ignited by my phone call with Lena. Her shocked silence was a confirmation. I had done the right thing. For years, I had been living in a fog of maternal obligation, a self-imposed prison of sacrifice. With 7 simple words, I had found the key and unlocked the door. But it wasn't enough to just feel it. I needed to understand it. I needed to see the full scope of my own foolishness, not as a source of shame, but as a source of strength. I needed to face the truth in black and white. Around midnight, I slipped out of bed, put on my old chenille robe, and walked into the dining room. The room was dark, illuminated only by a sliver of moonlight coming through the window. I flicked on the small table lamp, and the room was cast in a soft yellow glow. I went to the deep closet in the hallway, the one where I kept old photo albums and holiday decorations. On the top shelf, buried under a stack of Robert's old sweaters, were 4 shoeboxes filled with the financial paperwork of my life. Bank statements, canceled checks, credit card bills, tax returns. I hadn't looked at them in years. I pulled them down one by one, the dust making me sneeze, and carried them to the dining room table. This was not just about accounting. This was an excavation. I was digging through the layers of my recent past to uncover the truth I had refused to see. I opened the first box, the smell of old paper and ink filling the air. I laid out my tools, a notepad, a pen, and my old calculator. Then I began. I started with the most consistent, painful expense, the rent. I found the checkbook from 3 years ago and opened it. The entries were a monotonous testament to my generosity. October 2022, $500, max rent. November 2022, $500, max rent. On and on it went, a monthly reminder of my son's dependence and my compliance. I methodically went through every single month for 3 years. 36 entries, 36 times I had walked to the bank, filled out a slip, and sent my husband's legacy to a landlord I'd never met. I typed the equation into the calculator, 500 x 36. The number glowed back at me, $18,000. I wrote it down on the notepad under the heading, Rent. The number seemed to stare back at me, an accusation in itself. Next, I moved on to the larger, more sporadic expenses. This required digging through years of credit card statements. The process was agonizing, as each charge brought back a memory of a lie. There it was, the $3,000 charge from the bridal boutique. Underneath it on the same statement was a $250 charge from a fancy restaurant. I remembered Lena telling me they were too broke to eat out. A few months before that, a charge for $2,200 from a furniture store. I remembered buying them that sofa, the one Lena was sitting on when she told me I wasn't special. Then there was the mattress, the television, the new microwave, and the car repairs. One statement showed a $900 charge to a garage. I recalled Lena's panicked voice on the phone describing a transmission problem. The next month's statement showed a charge from a Ticketmaster-type site for 2 expensive concert tickets. Their emergencies always seemed to be followed by secret luxuries. I sifted through the grocery receipts I had kept, the ones from the times I'd stocked their entire pantry. $200 here, $300 there. It was a blur of indulgence, all paid for by my frugality. I stopped trying to be exact and settled on a conservative, sickening estimate. I wrote $10,000 next to furniture, groceries, and gifts. The final category was the hardest, cash, the direct transfers and cash withdrawals that were earmarked for emergencies. These were the ghosts in my financial history, the money that had simply vanished. I scanned the bank statements, my eyes catching the descriptions. ATM withdrawal, online transfer to Max Monroe. I remembered the stories attached to them. The time Max needed $500 in cash because he claimed he'd been mugged, only to have a new video game console appear in his apartment a week later. The time Lena needed $1,000 for a medical procedure not covered by insurance, a procedure she never spoke of again. It was a steady drain, a constant siphoning of my resources, always justified by a crisis that seemed to dissolve as soon as the money arrived. I painstakingly added up every transfer, every withdrawal that I could tie to one of their requests. The total made me nauseous, $5,000. I drew a thick line under the 3 figures on my notepad. My hand was trembling as I picked up the calculator one last time. $18,000, $10,000, $5,000. I pressed the plus sign between each number, and then, with a final, decisive push, the equals button. The number that appeared on the small screen felt impossible. It felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, stealing the air from my lungs. $33,000, $33,000. I stared at the number, and for the first time, I saw it not as a symbol of my love, but as the price of my own erasure. It was the cost of being their safety net. It was the sum total of their disrespect. Every dollar was a choice I had made, a choice to put their comfort before my own security, their wants before my own needs. I had financed my own heartbreak. The tears that came then were different from any I had shed before. They weren't the hot tears of a wounded mother. They were the cold, clear tears of a woman waking up from a long and terrible dream. I wasn't crying for the son I had lost. I was crying for the woman I had allowed myself to become, a walking, talking bank account with a mother's broken heart. I cried until the anger and the hurt were washed away, leaving behind only a hard, unshakable resolve. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the dining room window, I looked at the pile of papers and the damning number on my notepad. These were not just records of transactions. They were my reasons. 33,000 reasons to never go back. 33,000 reasons to choose myself. The old Lucia, the one who answered every call and paid every bill, had vanished with the night. In her place sat a new woman, forged in betrayal and financed by her own painful realization. A woman who was finally ready to become her own special person. The morning after my late-night accounting, I woke up to a house that felt fundamentally different. The sunlight that slanted through the blinds seemed clearer, the air less heavy. The silence that greeted me was not the hollow ache of loneliness, but the clean, quiet hum of a machine that had finally been switched off. For the first time in years, I woke up with a purpose that was entirely my own. There were no phantom anxieties about whether Max had enough for gas or if Lena would call with another manufactured crisis. There was only me, the day ahead, and the first task on a list I had mentally written as I'd finally drifted off to sleep. I made myself coffee. Real coffee from the expensive beans I usually saved for guests who never came. I drank it from my best china cup, the one with the little blue flowers that Robert had given me. I sat at my kitchen table and made a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, and I ate it slowly, deliberately. This small act felt like a revolution. It was a meal for me, to nourish me, not something scarfed down while worrying about someone else's needs. After I had washed my plate and cup, I went to my room and got dressed. I didn't put on my usual faded slacks and worn-out cardigan. I chose a crisp white blouse and a pair of tailored navy trousers I hadn't worn in years. I looked at myself in the mirror, really looked, and saw not a victim, but a woman on a mission. My first stop was the bank. It was the same bank I had been going to for over 40 years. The tellers all knew me by name. As I drove there, my hands were steady on the steering wheel, but my mind was a torrent of conflicting emotions. A deep, ingrained part of me, the mother part, screamed in protest. You're abandoning your son. What if he truly needs you? What if something terrible happens? It was the voice of guilt, a voice that had been my constant companion for a decade. But another voice, new and clear and cold, answered back. He is a grown man. His emergencies are his own. A truly terrible thing has already happened, and it happened to you. I thought of Robert. I could almost feel him in the passenger seat beside me, his steady presence a comfort. He had been a man of consequences. You make your bed, you lie in it, he used to say. A simple philosophy for a simple life. For years, I had unmade Max's bed every single morning, fluffing his pillows and straightening his sheets, so he would never have to lie in any discomfort of his own making. Robert would have been ashamed of what I'd allowed. The thought solidified my resolve. This wasn't just for me. It was for him. For the legacy of hard work he had left behind, a legacy I had squandered. When I walked into the bank, the familiar scent of clean carpets and printed money greeted me. Mr. Klein, the branch manager, saw me from his glass-walled office and gave me a warm, friendly wave. He was a kind man in his late 50s who had handled my accounts since his father retired. He'd helped me sort out Robert's finances after he passed. He knew my situation better than anyone. I walked straight to his office. Lucia, he said, standing up to shake my hand. Good to see you. What can I do for you today? I need to make some changes to my account, Jim, I said, my voice even and calm. I sat in the chair opposite his large mahogany desk. I have an automatic transfer set up for the first of every month to my son, Max Monroe. I need to cancel it. Permanently. Mr. Klein's smile faltered. He leaned forward, his expression shifting to one of gentle concern. Cancel it? The rent payment? Is everything all right, Lucia? Has Max moved? This was the first test. It would have been so easy to lie, to make up a story to avoid the embarrassment. He got a raise. He's moving in with a friend. The old Lucia would have done that. But the new Lucia was done with lies? No, he hasn't moved, I said, looking him directly in the eye. And I'm not sure if everything is all right with him, but everything is finally going to be all right with me. I need the transfer stopped immediately. He saw the steel in my gaze. He nodded slowly, a look of understanding dawning on his face. He'd seen this before, I realized. He'd seen other parents, other widows, make this same painful decision. He swiveled in his chair and typed something into his computer. The keys clicked softly in the quiet office. Okay, Lucia. The recurring transfer for $500 scheduled for the first of each month has been terminated. It will not go through again. He paused, then looked back at me. Is there anything else? Yes, I said, feeling a surge of empowerment. I want to put a note on my account. No transfers, electronic or by phone, are to be authorized without me being physically present in the bank with 2 forms of identification. And no information about my account balance or activity is to be given to anyone over the phone, including my son. Mr. Klein raised his eyebrows slightly, impressed. Of course, that's a very sensible precaution. He typed for another minute. It's done. Your account is secured. He printed a form and slid it across the desk for me to sign. As my pen moved across the paper, I felt as if I were signing a Declaration of Independence. When I walked out of the bank and into the bright autumn sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in a decade. The first chain had been broken. I had just gotten home and put the kettle on when my phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen. Max. My heart gave a familiar, painful lurch. My hand instinctively reached for the phone, the old reflex to answer, to soothe, to provide. But I stopped myself. I stared at his name, and I saw not my little boy, but a 32-year-old man who had stood by silently while his wife called me unspecial. I let it ring, and ring, and ring, until it finally fell silent. A minute later, it buzzed again. Lena. I almost laughed. The audacity. I ignored her call as well. The kettle began to whistle, a shrill, triumphant sound. As I poured the hot water over a tea bag, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from Max. Mom, pick up the phone. It's important. I read the message and set the phone down on the counter, face down. I took my tea into the living room and sat in Robert's armchair. I picked up a book I'd been meaning to read for months. The phone buzzed again, and again. A string of texts. I didn't look. I focused on the words on the page, letting them pull me into another world. A world where I was not a mother, not a widow, not a bank, but just a person, enjoying a quiet afternoon. For the next 2 hours, the assault continued. The calls alternated between Max and Lena. The texts became more and more frantic. Curiosity finally got the better of me. I picked up the phone and read the messages. From Max. Lena said you said something weird yesterday. What's going on? From Max. The landlord is calling us nonstop. He's going to evict us. Why didn't you pay the rent? From Lena. Lucia, you need to call me back right now. This is not funny. From Max. Mom, are you okay? Did something happen? Just pick up the phone so we know you're alive. That last one almost got me. The pretense of concern. The manipulation dressed up as love. It was a tactic they had used 100 times before, and 100 times it had worked. But today, I saw it for what it was. A desperate attempt to regain control. They weren't worried about whether I was alive. They were worried that their money supply was dead. The final text, which came around 5 o'clock, was the one that told me everything. It was from Max. What is wrong with you? After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us? Everything we've done for you? I read the words, and I felt nothing but a cold, final clarity. They truly believed it. In their twisted reality, they were the victims. I was the ungrateful one. I deleted the entire message thread. Then I turned my phone to silent and placed it in a drawer in the kitchen. For the first time in decades, my money was staying in my account. My heart was staying in my chest. My peace began the exact moment their access to me ended. That evening, I made myself a proper dinner. A small steak with roasted potatoes and green beans. I ate at my dining room table in the silence. It was the most satisfying meal I had ever eaten. I had survived the first battle in a war I didn't know I had been fighting, and I had won. The 3 days that followed my trip to the bank were eerily quiet. After the initial barrage of calls and angry texts, my phone fell silent. A fragile, tentative peace settled over my house. It was an unsettling quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. A part of me hoped foolishly that maybe it was over. Maybe my silence had been a clear enough answer. Maybe they had finally understood that the Bank of Lucia was closed for business and had moved on. But a deeper, wiser part of me knew better. This was not an ending. It was a strategic retreat. They were regrouping, planning their next assault. I tried to push the anxiety away by keeping busy. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors and washing windows until my arms ached. I spent an afternoon in the garden, pulling weeds with a vengeance, yanking them from the soil as if they were the ugly thoughts and painful memories that had taken root in my mind. On the third day, a Thursday, I decided to go grocery shopping. I made a list, and for the first time, it was filled with things just for me. A small bottle of good olive oil, a wedge of sharp cheddar cheese, a pint of fresh raspberries. Small luxuries I had long denied myself. The trip to the store was a small act of reclamation. I walked slowly down the aisles, taking my time, reading labels, choosing exactly what I wanted without a running tally of my sacrifices in my head. I left the store feeling lighter, almost cheerful. The sun was shining, and it felt like a new beginning. That feeling shattered the moment I pulled into my driveway. I saw it immediately. My front door was slightly ajar. I froze, my hand on the gear shift. I never left my door unlocked, let alone open. A cold dread washed over me. My first thought was a break-in. My heart hammered against my ribs as I imagined a stranger in my home, rifling through my belongings, through Robert's things. I cautiously got out of the car, my grocery bags forgotten on the passenger seat. I crept up the walkway, my senses on high alert. The silence from the house was more terrifying than a shout. I pushed the door open. The living room was empty, but I could see a man's dark wool coat draped over the back of one of my dining room chairs. And then I heard voices from the dining room, hushed, serious tones. One of them was Max's. All fear of a burglar vanished, replaced by a surge of ice-cold adrenaline. I walked through the archway into the dining room, and the scene before me stopped me in my tracks. There they were. My son, Max, and his wife, Lena, sat at my dining table. Between them sat a man I had never seen before, a stranger in a crisp suit with thinning gray hair and small, sharp eyes. And spread out on the polished surface of my table, the table where my family had shared thousands of meals, where I had helped Max with his homework as a boy, were my private papers, my bank statements, my old checkbooks, the very documents I had used to calculate the price of my betrayal just a few nights before. They had gone through my desk. They had invaded my home. They all looked up as I entered, their faces a mixture of surprise and guilt. Lena was the first to recover, pasting a sickly sweet, nervous smile on her face. "Lucia, there you are," she chirped, her voice a little too high. "We were so worried. You weren't answering your phone, so we used the spare key to check on you. The spare key I had given Max for emergencies. This, in their minds, qualified as an emergency. We were just so concerned," she continued, gesturing to the man in the suit. "This is Mr. Fisher. He's a family lawyer. We asked him to come. Well, just to help us figure out the best way to help you. Help me." The words hung in the air, a grotesque distortion of the truth. They weren't here to help me. They were here to take over. Max wouldn't look at me. He stared down at his hands, which were fiddling with a pen. He looked like a guilty child, not a 32-year-old man. "You've been acting strangely, Mom," he mumbled to the table. "Not answering your phone, cutting us off. It's not like you. We think you might be confused." Confused. That was their strategy. The concerned, loving son and his caring wife, worried about his elderly mother's sudden erratic behavior. The kind family lawyer, here to offer his gentle, professional guidance. It was a perfectly staged little play, and I was cast as the lead role, the senile old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own mind or her own money. I could see their entire plan laid out before me as clearly as my papers were laid out on the table. They were going to try to have me declared mentally incompetent, to gain control of my finances, to seize by force what I would no longer give them freely. This was not just a betrayal, it was a coup. The man, Mr. Fisher, gave me a condescending smile. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, his voice smooth and patronizing, "your son and daughter-in-law are simply exploring options to ensure your long-term well-being and financial security. Sometimes, as we get older, managing these things can become a burden." He spoke about me as if I weren't in the room, as if I were a problem to be managed, a set of assets to be reassigned. The rage that had been simmering inside me for a week finally boiled over, but it wasn't a hot, screaming rage. It was a cold, quiet fury that sharpened my mind and steadied my voice. I took a step forward, and I was no longer the confused old woman they were trying to create. I was the owner of this house. I was the master of my own life. I ignored Max and Lena completely. I fixed my gaze on the strange man sitting at my table, looking through my personal documents without my permission. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. He was taken aback by my directness. "As I said, I'm Charles Fisher. I'm an attorney." "Are you my attorney?" I cut him off. "Well, no," he stammered. "I'm here on behalf of your son." "Then you are a stranger in my house, touching my property without my consent," I stated, each word a chip of ice. "And you," I said, finally turning my gaze to Max, who flinched as if I had struck him. "You let this man into my home? You went through my desk? We were worried." Lena interjected, her voice rising with false emotion. We love you. Love? I let out a short, bitter laugh. You wouldn't know the meaning of the word. Love doesn't get married in secret and call its mother unspecial. Love doesn't demand rent money a week later. And love certainly doesn't invade a person's home and conspire to steal their life from them. Max finally looked up, his face pale, his eyes pleading. Mom, please. You're confused. Just listen to what Mr. Fisher has to say. I stared at my son, at the weak, entitled man he had become, and the last shred of maternal softness in my heart turned to stone. The only confusion here, I said, my voice ringing with a power I didn't know I possessed, is that you still seem to think my money belongs to you. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Lena's fake smile vanished. Max's jaw dropped. Even Mr. Fisher looked stunned, his professional composure momentarily shattered. They had expected tears, confusion, weakness. They had not expected this. I want you all out of my house, I said, my voice low and steady. Now, Mr. Fisher began to gather his papers, a flush creeping up his neck. Now, Mrs. Monroe, there's no need for hostility. Get out, I repeated, pointing toward the door. And if you ever set foot on my property again without my express invitation, I will call the police. Lena stood up, her face twisted with anger. The mask was off. You'll regret this, Lucia. You need us. No, I said calmly. You need my money. And that you will never have again. They left in a flurry of slammed doors and muttered threats about legal options and what's best for me. I stood in the dining room until I heard their car speed away down the street. The room felt violated, contaminated by their presence. I walked to the front door, shut it firmly, and slid the deadbolt across. The sound was a loud, satisfying thud. It was the sound of my fortress gate closing. I stood there for a long moment, my back against the door, my heart still pounding. But for the first time, it wasn't pounding with fear or hurt. It was pounding with the fierce, wild rhythm of a fight I had just won. I went straight to the phone, my mind clear and focused. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I called my own attorney. The next morning, I sat in the office of Mr. Weber, a lawyer Robert and I had used years ago to draw up our wills. His office was on the top floor of a modest building downtown, and it was the complete opposite of the scene in my dining room. It was a sanctuary of order and calm. The walls were lined with books, the desk was neat, and the air smelled of old paper and freshly brewed coffee. Mr. Weber himself was in his early 70s, with kind eyes behind thick glasses and a patient, reassuring demeanor. He remembered me, and more importantly, he remembered Robert, whom he'd respected. Lucia, he said, after shaking my hand warmly and offering me a cup of coffee. It's been too long. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. Your call yesterday was concerning. Please start from the beginning. Tell me everything. And so I did. For the next hour, I laid bare the last 3 years of my life. It was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. I told him about the monthly rent payments, the constant stream of emergencies, the wedding dress, the secret ceremony, and the final humiliating phone call from Lena. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled as I recounted the numbers, the manipulations, the slow erosion of my savings and my self-respect. Then I told him about the scene from yesterday, coming home to find them with a lawyer. My papers spread across my table, their talk of me being confused. I expected him to look at me with pity, to see me as a foolish old woman who had let her own son take advantage of her. But he didn't. He listened intently, his pen scratching across a legal pad, his expression becoming increasingly grim and focused. When I was finally done, the whole ugly story hanging in the quiet air between us, he put his pen down and looked at me, his gaze direct and filled with a surprising intensity. Lucia, he began, his voice firm but gentle. First of all, I want you to understand that none of this is your fault. You acted out of love. They acted out of greed. There is a world of difference between those two things. His words were like a balm on a raw wound. The shame I had been carrying, the secret belief that I was to blame for my own predicament, began to lift. Secondly, he continued, leaning forward, what they are doing isn't just unkind or immoral. It's a crime. There's a legal term for it, elder financial abuse. And their attempt to declare you incompetent without any medical basis, simply because you stopped giving them money, is a blatant and malicious form of it. They have crossed a very serious line. Hearing my chaotic, painful experience given a clear, legal name was a revelation. Elder financial abuse. It wasn't just a family squabble. It wasn't just me being overly sensitive. It was a recognized prosecutable offense. It validated everything I had been feeling. The power in the room shifted. I was no longer just a victim telling a sad story. I was a client and this was a case. So what do we do? I asked, my voice stronger now. We fight back, Mr. Weber said, a determined glint in his eye. We don't just build a wall, we build a fortress, and then we send a clear message that the war they tried to start is already over, and they have lost. For the next 2 hours, we planned our counterattack. It was methodical, strategic, and deeply empowering. First, he had me go home and gather every piece of evidence I had. The shoeboxes of bank statements, the canceled checks, the credit card bills showing the charges for the dress and furniture. I brought them back to his office that afternoon, and we sat together while his paralegal made copies of everything. The stack of papers, my 33,000 reasons, was no longer a monument to my shame. It was a dossier of their crimes. Next, we addressed the legal vulnerabilities they had tried to exploit. The first thing we do is completely rewrite your will, Mr. Weber explained. We will make it ironclad. We will specifically and explicitly disinherit Max, stating the reasons clearly so that it cannot be contested later on grounds of you being not of sound mind. We did it right then and there. I left my house and my remaining assets to my sister Clara and her children, the people who had shown me nothing but kindness and expected nothing in return. Then we established a durable power of attorney for both my finances and my health care. You need to appoint someone you trust implicitly to make decisions for you if you ever truly become unable to, he said. I named Clara. Mr. Weber explained that this legal document would preempt any attempt by Max to file for guardianship or conservatorship. We were closing every door, locking every window. The final step was the most direct. Mr. Weber drafted a formal cease and desist letter. It was a masterpiece of legal prose, polite but terrifyingly firm. It was addressed to Max, Lena, and Mr. Charles Fisher. It stated that I was in excellent mental and physical health, that I was represented by legal counsel, and that any further attempts to contact me, visit my property, or make inquiries into my financial or personal affairs would be met with immediate legal action, including filing for a restraining order and pursuing charges for harassment and financial abuse. This will put their lawyer on notice, Mr. Weber explained. No respectable attorney wants to be involved in a clear-cut case of elder abuse. My guess is Mr. Fisher will drop them as clients the moment he receives this. He sent the letters out that afternoon by certified mail. I walked out of his office feeling transformed. The fear was gone. The helplessness was gone. In their place was a profound sense of control. I had taken their ugliest betrayal and used it to build an impenetrable wall around myself. I was safe. A few days later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Lucia? It was Lena. Her voice was completely different. It was soft, trembling, and full of a syrupy, fake remorse. Lucia, I'm so sorry. We were scared. We overreacted. We love you so much, and we just want our family back. Can we please just talk? The old me would have melted. The old me would have heard the quiver in her voice and thought, she's sorry. She means it. But the new me heard every false note. This wasn't an apology. It was a last-ditch attempt at manipulation, a final, desperate plea from a parasite that had been cut off from its host. They had received Mr. Weber's letter. They knew they had lost. I held the phone to my ear and I felt nothing at all. No anger, no pain, just a calm, quiet finality. You made your choice, Lena, I said, my voice as steady as a rock. You made it when you got married without me. You made it when you called me unspecial. I'm making my choice now. And for the last time, I pressed the end call button on a conversation with her. Click. There were no tears. There was no shaking. There was just peace. A deep, quiet, and wonderful peace. The war was over. In the weeks that followed my final conversation with Lena, the silence that settled over my life was no longer eerie or unsettling. It was a vast, peaceful landscape, a quiet territory that belonged entirely to me. The first thing I did to claim that territory was to call a locksmith. A friendly young man came and replaced every lock on my house, including the one on the side gate. He handed me a set of new, shiny keys that no one else in the world had a copy of. As I slid the new key into the new lock of my front door and heard the solid, satisfying click, I felt a sense of security so profound it was almost dizzying. I was locking them out, yes, but more importantly, I was locking myself safely inside. My home was my fortress now, and I was its queen. With the perimeter secured, I began to work on the interior, not the house, but myself. For years, my identity had been wrapped up in being Max's mother. My needs, my wants, my very appearance had been neglected in favor of that all-consuming role. One morning, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman with tired eyes, graying hair pulled back in a severe, careless bun, and a wardrobe that consisted entirely of beige, gray, and faded brown. The woman in the mirror looked like a servant. I decided, then and there, that her service was over. I made an appointment at the best hair salon in my neighborhood, a place I had always walked past but never dared to enter. I was nervous, feeling out of place among the stylish younger women, but the stylist, a kind woman named Maria, treated me like an honored guest. "What are we doing today?" she asked with a warm smile. "I want to look like myself again," I said, the words coming out before I even knew I was going to say them. For the next 2 hours, I was pampered in a way I hadn't been in decades. Maria washed and cut my hair, shaping it into a soft style that framed my face. She showed me how to add highlights that blended away the gray and brought a warmth back to my complexion. When she was done, she turned me around to face the mirror, and I gasped. The woman looking back at me was still 68 years old, but her eyes were brighter, her face was softer, and she looked happy. I left the salon feeling like I was floating on air. From there, I went to a department store, and I bought myself a new coat. Not a practical, sensible coat, but a beautiful one, the color of a winter sky at dusk. I bought a new lipstick. I bought a pair of soft leather gloves. I was investing in Lucia, and it felt wonderful. My home began to transform as well. I went into the linen closet and pulled out the sad pink silk dress. I didn't feel any pain looking at it now. I simply folded it, put it in a box, and dropped it off at a charity donation bin. Its power over me was gone. In my garden, I pulled out the overgrown, neglected bushes and planted new ones, rose bushes, hydrangeas, and bright yellow daffodils that would bloom in the spring. Digging in the rich, dark earth felt therapeutic. I was uprooting the old and planting the new. Every evening, instead of eating a can of soup in front of the flickering television, I started cooking real meals for myself, setting a place at the dining room table with a proper placemat and a cloth napkin. I was treating myself like a person of value, a special guest in my own home. But the most important change was not in my appearance or my surroundings. It was in my connections to the world. The loneliness I had always feared, the emptiness I thought Max and Lena were filling, turned out to be an illusion. The emptiness was a void created by their constant taking. Once they were gone, there was room for real connection to grow. One sunny afternoon, while I was tending to my new roses, my next-door neighbor, Eleanor, came over to the fence. She was a widow, like me, and we had always exchanged polite waves but had never really talked. "Your garden is looking beautiful." "Lucia," she said, her smile genuine. "Thank you." "Eleanor," I replied. "I decided it was time to give it some attention." "I know the feeling," she said, her eyes a little sad. "Sometimes you spend so much time tending to everyone else's garden, you forget you have one of your own." That simple sentence created an instant bond between us. I invited her in for tea, and we sat at my kitchen table and talked for 2 hours. She told me about her own heartbreak with her daughter, a story of emotional distance and disappointment that echoed my own. And I, for the first time, told someone my full story, not as a legal case, but as a human experience. We cried a little, but mostly we laughed, a dark, knowing laughter of survivors. From that day on, we were fast friends. We started taking morning walks together, we traded recipes, and we went to the local cinema for the senior matinee on Wednesdays. Eleanor filled the silence in my life not with drama and demands, but with easy companionship and mutual respect. I also reconnected with my sister, Clara. I called her and told her everything, from the $33,000 to the confrontation in my dining room. She was horrified on my behalf, but also immensely proud. "It's about time, Lucia," she said, her voice fierce with protective love. "That boy and his wife needed to learn that the world doesn't revolve around them. I'm so proud of you for finally showing them the door." Her validation was a final healing balm. I was no longer just waiting for the phone to ring, dreading who might be on the other end. I was living. My days were full. I was Lucia Monroe again, a woman who loved gardening, a friend, a sister, a person with her own thoughts and her own life. The loneliness I had always been so afraid of turned out to be freedom. I was no longer waiting for my son to remember me. I was far too busy remembering myself. Months later, I was having coffee with Eleanor in my kitchen when she mentioned she'd seen a moving truck at Max's old apartment building. "I heard from another neighbor that they had to move," she said gently, watching my face for a reaction. "Couldn't make the rent. They found a much smaller place on the other side of town." I took a sip of my coffee. The news landed without a single pang of guilt or sadness. I felt no satisfaction, no desire for revenge. I felt nothing but a distant, quiet peace. They were learning what responsibility felt like. Their choices had finally led to their own consequences, and it had nothing to do with me anymore. Their life was their own, and for the first time, so was mine. And me? I was learning what peace sounds like. It's the sound of the morning paper hitting the porch. It's the laughter I share with Eleanor over a burnt batch of cookies. It's the silence of an afternoon spent reading in a comfortable chair. No phones ringing with manufactured emergencies. No guilt twisting in my stomach. No pretending that a financial transaction is a substitute for love. It's just the quiet, steady hum of a woman who finally stopped buying love and realized she was the most special person she knew all along. If you've ever given everything and received nothing in return, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because one day, your own peace will speak louder than their apologies ever could.